All right, let's just dive right in, shall we? When we think of the FIFA World Cup, we instantly picture this glittering, massive global spectacle. Millions of fans, historic goals, nations uniting over the beautiful game. But this explainer is going to focus on a really fascinating case study, the 2018 World Cup in Russia. And we're doing this because there is a wild contrast between the magic happening on the pitch and the deeply complex and honestly often pretty dark reality going on behind the scenes. So today, we're unpacking exactly why the 2018 hosting rights sparked such intense, relentless international debate. And to really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this debate, we've got to start with the money. $14.2 billion. That's billion with a B. As of June 2018, that was the estimated cost to put this tournament on. At the time, that made it the single most expensive World Cup ever held, completely blowing past the 2014 event in Brazil. Now get this, the Russian government originally earmarked an unbelievable $20 billion budget. Then it was slashed to $10 billion, only for costs to inevitably creep right back up as preparations went on. Literally half of that massive budget went straight into transportation infrastructure, things like aviation and railways. So the big takeaway here is that the financial stakes were just astronomical. And when you have that much money on the table, intense global scrutiny is basically a guarantee. To make sense of this massive web of controversy, we're going to hit 5 main areas today. First, the 2010 host selection. Second, the bidding corruption and investigations. Third, human rights and labor. Fourth, international geopolitics and conflicts. And finally, doping and trafficking scandals. All right, so part 1, the 2010 host selection. Let's head right back to the beginning, December 2nd, 2010, in Zurich, Switzerland, where the 22-member FIFA Executive Committee met up to pick the 2018 host. And if you look at how the voting played out, it's pretty wild. You've got 4 major European bids here. Now, England is the historical home of football, bidding for its second tournament, and they were shockingly knocked out in the very first round with just 2 votes, basically eliminated right out of the gate. Then, moving into round 2, Russia just surges ahead. They grab a majority of 13 votes, easily beating out the joint bids from Portugal and Spain, and Belgium and the Netherlands. So just like that, Russia secures the rights to be the very first Eastern European nation to host the tournament. But as you might guess, almost immediately, people started questioning the legitimacy of this vote. Which brings us to part 2, bidding corruption and investigations. Because the fallout from that fateful vote in Zurich was incredibly fast. The huge, unavoidable question echoing through the sports world was simple. Were these votes bought? Allegations of corruption and bribery popped up almost instantly. You had England's Football Association claiming that 4 members of the executive committee actually flat out requested bribes in exchange for their votes. And the fallout from this was intense. It was so bad that heavy hitters like former FA chairman David Bernstein actually called for a complete boycott of the World Cup. So feeling the heat, FIFA was basically backed into a corner and forced to launch an internal probe into their own bidding process. And this timeline right here, it is honestly a masterclass in institutional dysfunction. So in 2014, FIFA appoints a U.S. attorney named Michael J. Garcia to investigate the corruption allegations. But plot twist, before Garcia can even publish his full report, a German judge named Hans-Joachim Eckert releases this 42-page summary of the findings. And guess what? It effectively clears Russia of any wrongdoing. Critics instantly slam it as a total whitewash. But the craziest part is that Garcia himself appeals the summary. He calls it materially incomplete. And by December 2014, he resigns in protest. He basically says there's a complete lack of leadership and zero confidence in Eckert's independence. All of this internal chaos directly opens the door for external intervention. And by June of 2015, the FBI confirms they are officially investigating the bidding and awarding processes. Okay, moving on to part 3, human rights and labor. Because while all these boardroom scandals were grabbing the headlines, an arguably much darker reality was playing out on the ground in Russia. We really have to look at the human cost of building a $14.2 billion tournament. Organizations like Human Rights Watch documented a truly staggering array of abuses. The migrant laborers building these massive, shiny new stadiums were dealing with unpaid wages and being forced to work in dangerously cold environments. It got so bad that by June 2017, the Building and Woodworkers International reported at least 17 worker deaths on World Cup construction sites. And the issues didn't stop at labor. There was widespread international concern over high levels of racism documented in Russian football, not to mention state-sanctioned discrimination against LGBT individuals, which was highlighted by Russia's so-called gay propaganda laws. To really put this into perspective, we aren't just talking about claims from outside watchdog groups.
This was admitted from the very top. In May 2017, FIFA President Gianni Infantino outright acknowledged that North Korean workers had been subjected to human rights abuses while building the Zenit Arena in St. Petersburg. Just think about that. This specific revelation was so alarming that a group of U.S. senators publicly called on FIFA to consider entirely stripping Russia of its hosting rights if independent investigations verified these forced labor camps.
That leads us to part 4. International geopolitics and conflicts. Because outside the stadiums, the 2018 World Cup was totally tangled up in massive international crises.
You see, the geopolitical backlash actually started years before anyone even kicked a ball. Back in 2014, Russia's annexation of Crimea created this massive international rift. This sparked the very first serious political push to get the tournament relocated. But at the time, then FIFA President Sepp Blatter completely shut the idea down. He basically just stated that the World Cup had been voted to Russia and they were going full steam ahead with their work. But fast forward, and that political tension hits a boiling point just months before the tournament. I mean, look at this incredible contrast. On one side, in March 2018, we have a major diplomatic crisis. The UK expels 23 Russian diplomats following the nerve agent poisoning of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. British officials are out there warning fans of potential anti-British harassment. But then, on the flip side, look at the actual fan reality on the ground just 3 months later. Thousands of England fans traveled to Russia for their opening match against Tunisia, and many of them couldn't stop praising the incredibly warm welcome they got from locals in host cities like Volgograd. It perfectly captures this strange duality of the 2018 World Cup. You have this fierce diplomatic warfare happening at the state level, running parallel to genuine hospitality and celebration right there on the streets.
And finally, part 5. Doping and trafficking scandals. Here, we really have to look at the controversies that struck at the integrity of the sport itself, plus some really tragic, hidden societal impacts. So, first off, following the explosive McLaren reports that detailed state-sponsored doping in Russia, FIFA actually had to investigate allegations of doping within Russian football itself. And get this, Russian officials ultimately took absolutely zero part in World Cup drug testing procedures during the event. Crazy, right? But simultaneously, there was a truly horrific human cost happening completely in the shadows of the festivities. The huge influx of international visitors led to a devastating surge in human trafficking. Reports, which cited both the U.S. State Department and Reuters, documented how traffickers essentially used this massive sporting event to open the floodgates for exploitation. They specifically focused on tricking and trafficking Nigerian women into Russia to force them into sex work. So after all of this, we arrive at the ultimate question. Look, the 2018 World Cup was undeniably a massive entertainment success. It pulled in an estimated 3 million attendees, delivered some absolutely incredible matches, and capped off with France lifting the trophy in a spectacular final. But knowing what we know now, the FBI investigations into bribery, the 17 dead construction workers, the admission of forced labor, the massive geopolitical friction, and those hidden trafficking networks, we have to ask ourselves something really important. Does the sheer spectacle of a $14.2 billion tournament outweigh the profound human and political cost required to build it? It's a deeply complex legacy, and for sure, it's one that forces all of us to look a lot closer at the true price tag of the world's biggest sporting events.